The remote control slipped from Matteo Ricci's fingers when he saw her face on the screen. Not just her face, Elena's face. The woman he had loved 3 years ago. The woman who had walked away from him without explanation, leaving only a brief note and an empty apartment in the heart of Milan. And now there she was, frozen in a photograph on the breaking news segment, her blonde hair catching the studio lights as the anchorwoman's voice filled his penthouse with words that made his blood run cold. A serious car accident on the outskirts of Rome has left 2 people in critical condition this evening. Among them is Elena Marchetti, 29 years old, and her 6-month-old daughter, Sofia. Matteo's heart stopped. Daughter, 6 months old. His mind raced backward through time, calculating dates, remembering their last night together. The math was impossible to ignore. He stumbled forward, his knees weak, his eyes locked on the screen where Elena's smiling face appeared next to a photo of a tiny baby with the same piercing blue eyes that stared back at him from the mirror every morning. The November rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his apartment, 30 stories above the glittering streets of Milan. The city sparkled below him like a constellation of amber lights, but Matteo saw none of it. His entire world had narrowed to that television screen, to the words scrolling beneath Elena's photograph. Mother and child transported to San Rafael Hospital in critical condition. His hands trembled as he grabbed his phone from the black leather sofa. His assistant, Giorgio, answered on the second ring. "Prepare the car." "Now," Matteo's voice was barely recognizable, rough with emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "And call ahead to San Rafael Hospital in Rome. Tell them Matteo Ricci is coming, and I want access to Elena Marchetti's room. Sir, it's almost midnight, and the roads— I don't care if the roads are flooded, get me there." Matteo ended the call and stood frozen for a moment, staring at his reflection in the dark windows. At 35 years old, he had built an empire. Ricci Industries was one of the largest tech companies in Europe, with offices from Stockholm to Athens. He had everything money could buy: this penthouse, a villa on Lake Como, cars, influence, respect. But looking at his reflection now, at the designer suit that suddenly felt like a costume, at the expensive watch that couldn't turn back time, he realized he had nothing that mattered. He had lost Elena 3 years ago, and now he might lose a daughter he never knew existed. The drive to Rome was a blur of rain-slicked highways and racing thoughts. Giorgio drove in silence, sensing that his employer needed space to process whatever storm was raging inside him. Matteo sat in the back of the black Mercedes, his phone gripped in his white-knuckled hands, refreshing the news websites every few seconds, desperate for updates. The accident had happened on Via Appia Antica, one of the oldest roads in Rome, just after sunset. A delivery truck had run a red light, colliding with Elena's small Fiat at an intersection. Witnesses described the horrible sound of metal crushing metal, the way the smaller car had spun like a toy before crashing into a stone wall. Emergency services had arrived within minutes, but both Elena and the baby had been unconscious when they were pulled from the wreckage. Matteo's throat tightened as he read the details. He closed his eyes and forced himself to breathe, but all he could see was Elena's face. Not the photograph from the news, but the real Elena, the way she had looked the last time he'd seen her. It had been a warm evening in June, 3 years ago. They had been together for 8 months, and Matteo had been certain she was the one. He remembered how she laughed, how her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, how she challenged him in ways no one else dared. Elena worked as an architect, designing sustainable buildings that blended modern efficiency with classical Italian beauty. She was brilliant, passionate, and completely unimpressed by his wealth. That's what he had loved most about her. But then, without warning, she was gone. He had returned from a business trip to Berlin to find her apartment empty. Just a note on the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry, Matteo. This isn't the life I want. Please don't look for me. E." He had looked anyway. For months he had hired investigators, called every friend they had in common, checked every place she might have gone. But Elena had vanished completely, as if she had never existed. Eventually he had forced himself to stop searching, to bury the pain beneath layers of work and ambition. Now he understood why she had disappeared. She had been pregnant. pregnant with his child. The question that burned through him like acid was, why hadn't she told him? Why had she run away? What had frightened her so much that she chose to face motherhood alone rather than tell him the truth? The Mercedes pulled up to San Rafael Hospital at 2:15 in the morning. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets of Rome glistening and empty. Matteo barely waited for the car to stop before throwing open the door and striding toward the emergency entrance. The hospital was a maze of white corridors and antiseptic smells, but his name opened doors. Within minutes, a tired-looking doctor in green scrubs was leading him through the intensive care unit, speaking in low, measured tones about internal injuries, fractured bones, and something about brain swelling that made Matteo's stomach turn. "And the baby?" Matteo interrupted, his voice hoarse. The doctor's expression softened slightly. "The little one is stable. She has a fractured arm and some bruising, but children are remarkably resilient. She's in the pediatric ICU. The mother, however—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Ms. Marchetti sustained severe trauma. We've induced a coma to allow her brain to heal. The next 72 hours will be critical." They stopped outside a glass-walled room where machines beeped and hummed in the dim light. Through the window, Matteo saw Elena lying motionless in the hospital bed, her blonde hair fanned across the pillow, her face pale and peaceful despite the tubes and wires connecting her to various monitors. His legs almost gave out. "Can I see the baby?" The words came out as barely a whisper. The doctor nodded and led him down another corridor to the pediatric wing. They stopped outside a room where a tiny figure lay sleeping in a specialized crib. Matteo stepped closer to the window, and his breath caught in his chest. Sophia was beautiful. Even with the small cast on her arm and the bandage on her forehead, even in the harsh fluorescent light, she was perfect. She had Elena's delicate features and his eyes, those unmistakable Ricci blue eyes that had been in his family for generations. "I'm her father," Matteo said suddenly, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I didn't know until tonight, but I'm her father." The doctor studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We'll need to verify that legally, of course, but I can see the resemblance." He paused. "She's been asking for her mother. Well, not asking exactly. She's only 6 months old, but she's been fussy. Babies sense when their mothers aren't there." "Can I hold her?" "Let me check with the nurses." 10 minutes later, Matteo found himself sitting in a chair beside Sophia's crib, his hands freshly washed and sanitized, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. The nurse carefully lifted the sleeping baby and placed her in his arms, adjusting the blanket around her tiny body. The moment Sophia settled against his chest, something inside Matteo shattered and rebuilt itself simultaneously. He had held many things in his life: contracts worth millions, the keys to properties around the world, the hands of powerful people, but nothing had ever felt as important as this small, warm weight in his arms. Sophia stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Those blue eyes, his eyes, focused on his face with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so small. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other, father and daughter meeting for the first time. Then Sophia's face crumpled, and she began to cry. Sophia's cries echoed through the sterile hospital corridor, and Matteo felt more helpless than he had ever felt in his entire life. He had negotiated billion-euro deals without breaking a sweat. He had stood before shareholders and competitors with unwavering confidence, but this tiny 6-month-old baby, crying in his arms at 3 in the morning, had reduced him to a trembling mess of inadequacy and fear. "Shh, piccola mia," he whispered, gently rocking her the way he had seen parents do in movies. "It's okay. You're safe. I'm here." But Sophia wasn't consoled. Her small face was red, tears streaming down her cheeks, her good arm flailing while the casted one remained still against her body. The nurse stepped forward with a bottle of formula, her expression patient and understanding. "She's probably hungry and confused," the nurse explained, her voice soft with the practiced gentleness of someone who had comforted countless frightened children. "Her whole world has been turned upside down. May I?" Matteo reluctantly handed Sophia back, watching as the experienced nurse settled into the rocking chair and offered the bottle. Within seconds, Sophia's cries subsided into small hiccups, then silence as she drank greedily, her blue eyes still fixed warily on Matteo's face. "You're her father?" the nurse asked quietly, not looking up from Sophia. "Yes." The word felt both foreign and absolutely true on his tongue. "I only found out tonight. About the accident. About everything." The nurse's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't comment. Instead, she said, "The social worker will need to speak with you in the morning. There are procedures when a child's primary caregiver is incapacitated. Do you have any proof of paternity?" "Not yet. But I'll get a DNA test done immediately, whatever it takes. The baby will need somewhere to go when she's discharged, probably in a day or two if she continues to improve. The authorities will need to place her somewhere safe until her mother recovers." The implication hung in the air between them. Until her mother recovers. If her mother recovers. Matteo's jaw tightened. "She'll come home with me. I have resources, staff, whatever she needs. I can hire the best nanny in Italy by tomorrow morning." The nurse finally looked up at him, her dark eyes assessing. "Children don't need the best nanny in Italy, Mr. Ricci. They need love, stability, and someone who shows up. Can you be that person?" The question hit him harder than any business challenge ever had. Could he? He worked 16-hour days. He traveled constantly. His life was meetings, flights, hotel rooms, and deals. There was no space in that world for a baby. But as he watched Sophia finish her bottle, her eyelids growing heavy, her tiny fingers curling and uncurling against the nurse's scrubs, he knew with absolute certainty that he would make space. He would remake his entire world if necessary. "Yes," he said firmly, "I can be that person." The nurse studied him for another long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then you'd better start learning. Sit down, Mr. Ricci. I'm going to teach you how to hold your daughter properly." For the next hour, as Rome slept outside the hospital windows and the November night deepened toward dawn, Matteo Ricci received the most important education of his life. He learned how to support Sophia's head, how to read her cues, how to burp her, how to change a diaper. The nurse was patient but firm, correcting his mistakes, praising his small victories, treating him not as a billionaire, but as a new father who desperately needed guidance. By the time the sky began to lighten with the first hints of sunrise, Sophia had fallen asleep in his arms again, this time peaceful, her breathing soft and steady against his chest. Matteo sat in the chair by her crib, afraid to move, afraid to disturb this fragile moment of trust. "You're a natural," the nurse said quietly as she prepared to end her shift. "She feels safe with you. That's the most important thing." After she left, Matteo sat in the dim room watching Sophia sleep, his mind racing with questions that had no answers. Why had Elena hidden this from him? What had happened in those last weeks before she disappeared? Had she been afraid of something? Of someone? Of him? The thought made his chest ache. He had never given Elena reason to fear him, had he? He had been demanding in business, yes, and sometimes distracted by work, but he had loved her. He had wanted to build a life with her. Unless she hadn't believed that, unless she had seen something in him, some reflection of his father's coldness, perhaps, that made her think he would be a terrible parent. His own father, Giovanni Ricci, had been a titan of industry, but an absent, emotionally distant parent. Matteo had spent his childhood in boarding schools and his teenage years proving himself worthy of carrying the Ricci name. Love had always been conditional, tied to achievement and success. Was that what Elena had feared? That he would raise their child the same way? As the sun rose over Rome, painting the hospital room in shades of gold and amber, Matteo made a silent promise to the sleeping baby in his arms. He would not be his father. He would not let Sophia grow up feeling like an obligation or a business transaction. Whatever it took, however much he had to change, he would be the father she deserved. At 7 in the morning, Giorgio appeared in the doorway, carrying a bag with fresh clothes and looking exhausted from the all-night drive. "Sir, I've arranged everything. The DNA test can be done this morning, and I've contacted 3 of the top childcare agencies in Rome. They're sending candidates this afternoon. Good. Matteo's voice was rough from lack of sleep. And Elena? Any updates? Giorgio's expression darkened. Still in a coma. The doctors say it's too early to know anything definite. I also took the liberty of calling your attorney. He's on his way. Within the hour, a technician had collected DNA samples from both Matteo and Sofia, a simple cheek swab that would either confirm what Matteo already knew in his heart or shatter everything. The results would take 24 to 48 hours, but Matteo had paid extra for the expedited processing. By mid-morning, his attorney, Roberto Ferretti, arrived with a briefcase full of documents and the expression of practiced concern. Roberto had been the Ricci family lawyer for 2 decades, a sharp-minded man in his 60s who had guided Matteo through countless legal matters. "This is complicated, Matteo," Roberto said as they sat in a small consultation room down the hall from Sofia's room. "Even if the DNA test confirms paternity, you're not listed on the birth certificate. Ms. Marchetti has full custody. While she's incapacitated, the state technically has the authority to place the child in foster care pending her recovery." "That's not happening." Matteo's voice was ice. "I know. But we need to do this correctly. I'll file an emergency petition for temporary custody, citing your biological relationship and your ability to provide for the child. Given your resources and standing and assuming the DNA test is positive, a judge should grant it. But Matteo..." Roberto paused, choosing his words carefully. "You need to be prepared for what happens when Ms. Marchetti wakes up. If she wakes up, she kept this child from you for a reason. There may be legal battles ahead." "I don't care about legal battles. I care about my daughter being safe and cared for while her mother fights for her life." Roberto nodded. "Then we'll make it happen. But there's something else you should know. I did some checking. Delina Marchetti hasn't been working as an architect for the past year. She's been living in a small apartment in Trastevere, Rome's historic district, on a modest income. Neighbors say she kept to herself, rarely went out except for necessities. It's like she was hiding." "Hiding from what?" "That's what concerns me. From you? From someone else? We don't know. But people don't disappear and live small, quiet lives unless they're running from something." The words settled over Matteo like a heavy blanket. He thought about the Elena he had known. Vibrant, ambitious, always talking about her dreams of designing buildings that would stand for centuries. That woman wouldn't have been content in a small apartment, living in obscurity. Something had changed her. Something had frightened her enough to give up everything. The rest of the day passed in a blur of paperwork, interviews with social workers, and phone calls with his executive team back in Milan. Matteo delegated everything he could, rescheduled everything else, and made it clear that he would be in Rome indefinitely. His board members were shocked. Matteo Ricci never took time off, but no one dared question him. By evening, 3 potential nannies had been interviewed and dismissed. One was too rigid, another too inexperienced, and the third, despite impressive credentials, had looked at Sofia with the detached professionalism of someone who saw childcare as merely a job. Matteo wanted someone who would love his daughter, not just manage her. "Perhaps you're being too selective," Giorgio suggested gently as they sat in the hospital cafeteria, picking at mediocre pasta and drinking strong espresso. "I'm not putting my daughter in the hands of someone who doesn't genuinely care about her well-being." "Your daughter?" Giorgio smiled slightly. "You've already accepted it as fact." "I knew the moment I saw her eyes. But yes, legally, we'll wait for the test results." As night fell over Rome for the second time since the accident, Matteo returned to Elena's ICU room. The doctors had told him there was no change. She remained stable, but unresponsive, her brain still swollen from the impact. They had reduced some of the sedation, hoping her body would begin to heal on its own, but warned that recovery could take days or weeks, or might never come at all. Matteo stood by her bedside, studying her face in the dim light. She looked younger somehow, more vulnerable than he remembered. There were small changes too, fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, a slight fullness to her face that came from pregnancy and motherhood. "Why didn't you tell me, Elena?" he whispered. knowing she couldn't hear him but needing to say the words anyway. "Did you think I wouldn't want her? Wouldn't want you? I would have given up everything. The company, the money, all of it. If you had just told me." His voice broke and he had to stop. He reached out and gently took her hand, careful of the IV line, feeling the warmth of her skin. She was alive. She was fighting. He had to believe she would come back. "Sophia is beautiful," he continued softly. "She has your smile even when she's crying. And she's strong, Elena. So strong. Just like her mother. She's going to be okay. And when you wake up, we're going to figure this out. All of it. I don't care what happened or why you left. We'll find a way forward for Sophia, for us." He stayed there until midnight, talking to Elena about nothing and everything. About Sophia's first smile when the nurse made funny faces, about how she gripped his finger with surprising strength, about the plans he was already making to child-proof his penthouse. He told her about the work waiting for him in Milan and how none of it seemed important anymore. He apologized for the times he had chosen work over her, for the moments he had been too distracted to truly see her. And he made promises, to be better, to be present, to be the man she had needed him to be 3 years ago. When he finally left her room, exhausted but unable to sleep, he found a text message from Roberto. "DNA results expedited. Should have them by morning. Also found something interesting about Elena's past. We need to talk." Matteo stared at the message, a knot of apprehension forming in his stomach. Whatever Roberto had discovered, it was clearly significant. Another piece of the puzzle that was Elena's disappearance, but that would have to wait for tomorrow. Tonight he needed to check on Sophia one more time before trying to rest. As he walked toward the pediatric ICU, he realized that in just 24 hours, his entire life had been transformed. The man who had walked into this hospital last night was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood what truly mattered. He was a father now, and nothing would ever be the same. The DNA results arrived at 8:30 in the morning, and Matteo didn't need to open the envelope to know what they said. He held the sealed document in his hands, sitting in the hospital waiting room with morning light streaming through the windows, and felt the weight of absolute certainty. Sophia was his daughter. He had known it from the moment he saw her, felt it in every fiber of his being when he held her. But this piece of paper would make it legal, official, undeniable. Roberto sat across from him, briefcase open, already preparing the emergency custody petition. Giorgio stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, coordinating with the staff back in Milan, and Matteo simply stared at the envelope, afraid that opening it would make everything too real, too permanent, too terrifying. "Matteo," Roberto said gently, "we need to know for certain, for the court." With hands that trembled slightly, Matteo tore open the envelope and pulled out the document. His eyes scanned the technical language, the percentages, the scientific terminology, until he found the conclusion printed in bold letters. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Matteo Ricci is conclusively confirmed to be the biological father of Sophia Marchetti. He released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Relief, joy, fear, and overwhelming responsibility crashed over him in waves. He was a father. Officially, legally, scientifically, he was Sophia's father. "Congratulations," Roberto said with a genuine smile. "Now let's make sure you can take your daughter home." Within hours, Roberto had filed all the necessary paperwork with the family court in Rome. Given Matteo's proven paternity, his financial stability, and the emergency circumstances, a judge granted temporary custody pending Elena's recovery. By early afternoon, the hospital's social worker had approved his release of Sophia into his care, with the stipulation that he hire a qualified caregiver and submit to regular check-ins. But before Matteo could celebrate this small victory, Roberto pulled him aside into a private corner of the hospital. "We need to talk about what I found," Roberto said, his expression grave, "about Elena's past, about why she might have run." Matteo's stomach tightened. "Tell me." Roberto opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. 3 years ago, shortly after Elena left you, there was an incident. A man named Marco Santini was arrested for stalking. The complaint was filed by Elena herself. The name meant nothing to Matteo. Who is he? A former colleague from her architecture firm. According to the police report, Santini had become obsessed with Elena over several months. It started with unwanted attention at work, then escalated to following her, sending inappropriate messages, showing up at her apartment. When she rejected him firmly, he became aggressive. Matteo felt ice spread through his veins. How aggressive? He never physically harmed her, but the threats were serious enough that Elena obtained a restraining order. Santini was fired from the firm, arrested, and eventually served 6 months in jail for violating the restraining order. He was released 2.5 years ago. The timeline clicked into place in Matteo's mind. Elena had left him 3 years ago. She must have been dealing with this Santini situation while they were together. Why hadn't she told him? As if reading his thoughts, Roberto continued, "There's more. I spoke with Elena's former supervisor at the architecture firm. She said Elena became very withdrawn during that period, afraid that Santini's obsession would escalate. But she was also terrified that involving you would make things worse." "Make things worse? How?" Roberto hesitated. "Apparently Santini had specifically mentioned you in his rants. He was jealous of your relationship with Elena, fixated on the idea that you had stolen her from him. Elena's supervisor said she feared that if you confronted Santini, given your resources and influence, it might push him over the edge. She was trying to protect you both." Matteo sank into a chair, his mind reeling. All this time he had thought Elena left because she didn't love him, because she didn't want the life he offered. But she had been running from danger, trying to keep him safe, dealing with a nightmare alone. "Is he still in Rome?" Matteo asked, his voice low and dangerous. "We don't know. After his release, Santini disappeared. No employment records, no permanent address. He could be anywhere." "Find him." Matteo's words were steel. "I want to know where Marco Santini is, what he's doing, and if he poses any threat to Sofia or Elena. Hire investigators. Use whatever resources necessary." "Already done. I have a team working on it." Roberto closed the folder. "But Matteo, there's something else you need to consider. If Elena was running from Santini, and if she discovered she was pregnant around the time she left, she might have been trying to protect Sofia too. A baby would have been vulnerable, a potential target if Santini found them." The thought made Matteo's blood boil. Elena had spent nearly 3 years living in hiding, raising their daughter alone, all because some obsessed man had made her life a nightmare. And he, her partner, the man who loved her, had known nothing about it. "I should have known," Matteo said quietly. "I should have seen the signs. She was different in those last weeks, more distant, more nervous. I thought she was having doubts about us, but she was afraid. You couldn't have known if she didn't tell you. I should have paid more attention. I was so focused on work, on closing deals, on building the company. I failed her, Roberto. Then don't fail her now. Focus on keeping Sofia safe and being here when Elena wakes up." Matteo nodded, swallowing the guilt that threatened to overwhelm him. Roberto was right. He couldn't change the past, but he could control what happened next. That afternoon, after hours of searching, a nanny was finally selected. Her name was Lucia Ferraro, a 53-year-old woman with warm brown eyes, a gentle smile, and 30 years of experience caring for children. Unlike the others, Lucia didn't seem intimidated by Matteo's wealth or status. She had asked intelligent questions about Sofia's routine, her health, her needs, and had held the baby with natural confidence that immediately put Matteo at ease. "She's been through trauma," Lucia said as she expertly changed Sofia's diaper, while Matteo watched and learned. "Not just the accident, but the separation from her mother. She'll need consistency, patience, and a lot of love." "Can you provide that, Mr. Ricci?" "Yes," Matteo said without hesitation. "And please call me Matteo." Lucia smiled. "Then call me Lucia. We're a team now. For Sofia." By evening, arrangements had been made to move Sofia to a private recovery suite, where she could stay until her cast was removed and she was fully cleared for discharge. Matteo had rented an apartment nearby, refusing to be more than 5 minutes away from the hospital where Elena lay fighting for her life. As Matteo sat in Sofia's room that night, giving her a bottle under Lucia's patient guidance, his phone buzzed with a message from his head of security. Santini located. Currently living in Naples under an assumed name. Working as a delivery driver. Surveillance established. No indication he knows about the accident or the baby. Recommend continued monitoring. Relief and anger warred within Matteo. At least Santini wasn't an immediate threat, but the fact that he was out there living his life while Elena suffered made Matteo want to do something rash. But he forced himself to stay calm, to think clearly. Confronting Santini now would serve no purpose except satisfying his anger. What mattered was Elena and Sofia. Everything else was secondary. "You're thinking too hard," Lucia observed, settling into the chair beside him. "I can see the wheels turning in your head. Just processing everything. It's been a complicated few days. Life with children is always complicated, but it's also the most rewarding thing you'll ever do." She paused, watching Sofia drink contentedly. "She looks at you like you're her whole world already. That's special." Matteo looked down at his daughter, at her tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb, at the way her eyes tracked his face even as she drank. Something fierce and protective surged through him, a primal instinct he had never experienced before. "I won't let anyone hurt her," he said quietly. "Or her mother." "I know," Lucia said. "That's why I agreed to take this job. I've worked for many wealthy families, Matteo. Most of them see children as accessories, status symbols. But you look at this baby like she's the most precious thing in the world. That's the kind of father every child deserves." Her words settled something in his chest, easing the constant doubt that had plagued him since the moment he learned Sofia existed. Late that night, after Sofia had fallen asleep and Lucia had retired to the adjoining room to rest, Matteo returned to Elena's ICU room. The doctors had told him earlier that they were reducing her medications further, hoping her body would begin the natural process of waking. But there was no guarantee. Brain injuries were unpredictable, they warned. She might wake up tomorrow, or next week, or never. Matteo refused to accept that last possibility. He pulled a chair close to her bedside and took her hand, just as he had every night since the accident. The bruises on her face were beginning to fade, the swelling reducing. She looked more like herself now, more like the woman he remembered. "I met with a lawyer today," he said softly. "Found out about Marco Santini, about what he put you through. Elena, why didn't you tell me? I would have protected you. I would have done anything." The machines continued their steady rhythm, the only response in the quiet room. "I understand why you left now. You were trying to keep us safe. Sofia and me. That's so like you. Always putting others first, even at great cost to yourself." His voice broke slightly. "But you don't have to do that anymore. I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. And Santini can't hurt you or Sofia. I've made sure of that." He told her about the past 3 days, about holding Sofia for the first time, about learning to be a father, about the DNA test and the custody arrangement. He described how beautiful their daughter was, how strong, how she had his eyes but Elena's spirit. "She needs you to wake up," Matteo whispered. "I need you to wake up. There's so much I need to say, so much I need to make right. Please, Elena, come back to us." For a long time he sat in silence, holding her hand, listening to the sounds of the hospital at night. And then, so faint he almost missed it, he felt something. A squeeze. Elena's fingers tightened around his hand, just for a second, barely perceptible but unmistakably real. Matteo's heart leapt into his throat. "Elena, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand again if you can hear me." He waited, barely breathing, every nerve in his body focused on that contact. Seconds stretched into eternity, and then it came again, stronger this time. A definite squeeze. Matteo was on his feet instantly, pressing the call button for the nurses, his free hand still clasping Elena's. "Elena, it's Matteo. You're in the hospital. You were in an accident, but Sofia is safe. She's okay. And you're going to be okay too." Within minutes, the room filled with medical staff. Doctors examined Elena, checked her monitors, shone lights in her eyes. And through it all, Matteo stood by her side, refusing to let go of her hand, silently willing her to fight her way back to consciousness. "This is a very good sign," the doctor said, unable to hide his smile. "The brain is responding. It could still be hours or even days before she fully wakes, but this is definite progress." After the medical team left, Matteo stayed, unwilling to leave her side now. He pulled the chair even closer and leaned forward, speaking softly. "I felt that, Elena. I know you're fighting your way back. Keep fighting. Sophia and I are waiting for you. We're not going anywhere." As dawn broke over Rome for the third day since the accident, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Matteo finally allowed himself to feel something he hadn't dared to feel before. Hope. Elena's eyes opened on the fifth day, and the first word she whispered was her daughter's name, Sophia. Matteo had been dozing in the chair beside her bed, exhausted from 5 days of splitting his time between Elena's ICU room and caring for Sophia. The sound of her voice, hoarse and weak but unmistakably hers, jolted him awake instantly. "Elena!" He was on his feet, leaning over her bed, his heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. "Don't try to move. You're in the hospital. You were in an accident, but you're safe. You're going to be okay." Her eyes, still clouded with confusion and pain, struggled to focus on his face. "Matteo?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "What? How?" "Shh. Don't strain yourself. Let me get the doctor." He pressed the call button but kept his other hand firmly clasped around hers. "Sophia is fine, Elena. She has a small fracture on her arm, but she's healthy and safe, I promise you." Tears began to slide down Elena's temples as the memories clearly came rushing back. The accident, the impact, the terrible fear for her baby. "I need to see her." "You will, as soon as the doctors clear you. She's just down the hall." Matteo gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. "She's beautiful, Elena. She has your smile and your strength." Before Elena could respond, the medical team arrived, flooding the room with efficient activity. They examined her thoroughly, asked questions about her name, the date, what she remembered. Elena answered slowly, clearly struggling, but each response was lucid and appropriate. The relief on the doctors' faces was evident. "This is excellent, Ms. Marchetti," the lead physician said with a warm smile. "Your brain is healing well. We'll need to monitor you closely for the next few days, but all signs point to a full recovery. You're very lucky." After the medical staff left, Elena turned her head slowly to look at Matteo. Really look at him. Her expression was complex: relief, fear, confusion, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "How did you—" she started, her voice still weak. "How did you know? About Sophia? About the accident?" "I saw it on the news. I was in Milan, and your face appeared on the screen." "You and Sophia?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Elena, why didn't you tell me? When you left 3 years ago, you were pregnant. Why didn't you let me know I had a daughter?" Fresh tears spilled from her eyes. "I was trying to protect you, to protect her. I was so scared, Matteo." "I know about Marco Santini," Matteo said gently. "My lawyer found the police reports, the restraining order. Elena, you should have told me. I could have helped you." She closed her eyes, a sob catching in her throat. "He threatened you. In his messages, in his rants when he followed me, he said terrible things about what he would do if he couldn't have me, and you were always in the news, always visible, always a target. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. A baby would have been so vulnerable. I thought if I disappeared, if I made it seem like I had left you voluntarily, Santini would leave you alone, and Sophia would be safe. So you sacrificed everything, your career, your life, your future. You lived in hiding for almost 3 years. I would do it again." Her voice was fierce despite its weakness. "To keep her safe. To keep you safe." Matteo felt something break open inside his chest. All the anger, all the hurt from 3 years of not understanding, dissolving in the face of her desperate courage. She had loved him enough to leave, had loved their daughter enough to raise her alone in fear and uncertainty. "Where is Santini now?" Elena asked, fear creeping back into her voice. "In Naples, under surveillance. He doesn't know about the accident or that I've found you. My security team is monitoring him. If he makes any move toward Rome, toward you or Sophia, we'll know immediately. And I've already spoken with the police about increasing the restraining order and ensuring he faces consequences if he violates it." Elena's eyes widened. "Matteo, you can't. He's dangerous." "If you confront him." "I'm not going to confront him. I'm going to do what I should have done 3 years ago. Protect my family through legal means and proper security. He'll never get near you or Sophia. That's a promise." The word hung in the air between them. Family. "I saw the DNA test results in your file," Elena said quietly. "So you know. You know she's yours." "I knew the moment I saw her eyes. Everything else was just paperwork." Matteo squeezed her hand gently. "Elena, I've spent the past 5 days learning to be a father. Lucia, that's the nanny I hired, has been teaching me everything. How to hold Sophia, feed her, change her, read her cues. I've made more mistakes in 5 days than I made in 10 years of running a company. But I'm learning, and I'm not going anywhere." "You hired a nanny." Despite everything, Elena managed a weak smile. "The great Matteo Ricci, asking for help?" "Fatherhood is humbling, but Sophia is worth every moment of humility." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 3 lost years pressing down on them. Finally, Elena spoke again, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Matteo, for leaving, for not trusting you with the truth, for depriving you of Sophia's first months. I thought I was doing the right thing, but maybe I was just being a coward." "You weren't a coward. You were terrified and trying to protect everyone you loved. I understand that now." He paused, gathering his courage for what he needed to say next. "But Elena, we can't go back to how things were 3 years ago. Too much has happened. Too much has changed. We need to figure out what comes next, for Sophia's sake." "I know." She looked away, fresh tears threatening. "You have every right to be angry with me, to fight for custody. I kept your daughter from you." "I'm not going to fight you for custody, Elena. Sophia needs both of us. But we need to be honest with each other, completely honest, going forward. No more secrets, no more running. We face everything together." "Together," she repeated softly, as if testing the word. "After everything I did, why would you want that?" "Because Sophia deserves parents who work together, who communicate, who put her first, and because—" He hesitated, then decided honesty was worth the risk. "Because I never stopped loving you, Elena. Even when I was angry, even when I didn't understand why you left, there was always a part of me that belonged to you." Elena's eyes met his, and for the first time since she woke, he saw hope there alongside the fear and pain. "I never stopped loving you either," she whispered. "That's what made leaving so hard." The next 2 hours were spent talking, really talking, in a way they perhaps never had before. Elena described the terror of those last weeks before she left, the progression of Santini's obsession, the moment she discovered she was pregnant and realized she had to disappear. Matteo told her about the 3 years of searching, of throwing himself into work to avoid the pain, of the hole her absence left in his life. They talked about Sophia, about her birth, her first smile, the milestones Matteo had missed. Elena showed him photos on her phone, which had been recovered from the accident, and Matteo felt both joy at seeing his daughter's early days and grief at not being there for them. "I want to be there for everything from now on," Matteo said firmly. "First words, first steps, everything. We'll figure out the logistics, where we live, how we share responsibilities, all of it. But I'm not missing another moment of her life." "What about your company? Milan is your home." "My company can survive without me being in the office every day. Technology allows me to work from anywhere. And anyway," he smiled slightly, "I'm discovering that being a billionaire means very little compared to being a father." Finally, the doctors agreed that Elena was stable enough for a brief visit with Sophia. Matteo wheeled Elena's bed to the pediatric recovery room where Lucia sat rocking Sophia, who was fussy and overtired from a long day. The moment Sophia saw her mother, even from across the room, she began to cry. Not the frustrated cry Matteo had become familiar with, but a desperate, reaching cry that broke his heart. "Mama's here, Piccola," Lucia said softly, bringing Sophia closer to the bed. "Mama's here." Elena was crying too, her arms reaching for her daughter despite the IV lines and the pain of her injuries. Carefully, with Matteo's help, they settled Sophia on Elena's chest, and the baby immediately quieted, nuzzling into her mother's neck with small, hiccuping sobs. "I'm here, baby," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Mama's here. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Matteo stood back, giving them this moment, feeling Lucia's hand rest gently on his arm in quiet support. Watching Elena and Sophia together, seeing the bond between them, he felt both overwhelming gratitude that they had survived and determination that he would spend the rest of his life making sure they never felt unsafe again. Over the following week, Elena's recovery progressed steadily. She was moved from ICU to a regular room, then to a rehabilitation unit where physical therapists helped her regain her strength. Sophia's cast was removed, and she was officially discharged into Matteo and Elena's joint care, with Lucia's assistance. True to his word, Matteo had rearranged his life. He moved his base of operations to Rome, setting up a home office in a spacious apartment near the hospital. His executives in Milan adapted, conducting meetings via video conference and traveling to Rome when necessary. The board grumbled initially, but the company's stock actually rose when news of Matteo's family situation became public. Investors apparently appreciated a CEO who valued family. As for Marco Santini, he remained under surveillance in Naples, unaware that his worst nightmare, Elena and Matteo reunited, had come true. Matteo's security team worked with law enforcement to build a case for extended restrictions, using Santini's past violations and ongoing obsessive behavior as evidence. Eventually, after a court hearing where Elena testified via video link, Santini was served with a permanent restraining order and mandatory counseling. He was warned that any attempt to contact or approach Elena, Matteo, or Sophia would result in immediate arrest. The threat that had haunted Elena for 3 years was finally, officially neutralized. On a crisp December morning, 3 weeks after the accident, Elena was discharged from the hospital. Matteo pulled up in front of the rehabilitation center in a comfortable SUV, a far cry from his usual sports cars, but infinitely more practical for a child's car seat. Elena emerged in a wheelchair, still weak but smiling, with Sophia bundled in her arms. Lucia held bags of belongings, chattering about the preparations she had made at the apartment. Giorgio had brought flowers. Even Roberto was there, having grown unexpectedly attached to the little family he had helped unite. "Ready to go home?" Matteo asked, helping Elena into the car and making sure Sophia's car seat was properly secured. "Home," Elena repeated, testing the word. "Where is home exactly?" "Wherever we decide it is. Together." The apartment Matteo had rented was on the top floor of a beautiful building in Trastevere, Elena's neighborhood. It had high ceilings, original frescoes, and large windows overlooking the Tiber River. But more importantly, it had been transformed in the past week into a home. A nursery painted soft yellow with a sturdy crib, a living room filled with comfortable furniture perfect for family time, and a kitchen that Lucia had already stocked with everything needed for a baby and 2 adults learning to be parents. "It's perfect," Elena said, looking around with tears in her eyes. "Matteo, this is too much. It's not nearly enough, but it's a start." That evening, after Sophia had been fed, bathed, and put to bed in her new nursery, Matteo and Elena sat together on the sofa, watching the lights of Rome twinkle in the darkness beyond their windows. Lucia had retired to her own room, giving them privacy. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and this will all have been a dream," Elena said softly. "The accident, you finding us, all of it. If it's a dream, I don't want to wake up." She turned to look at him, really look at him. "We have a lot to figure out still. About us, about what we are to each other. These past 3 years changed both of us." Then we'll take our time figuring it out. No pressure, no expectations. We'll just see where this goes, for Sophia's sake and ours. I'd like that. Elena leaned her head against his shoulder, and Matteo wrapped his arm around her, careful of her still healing ribs. They sat like that for a long time, two people who had been broken apart and were slowly, carefully, finding their way back to each other. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, difficult conversations, moments of doubt. But they had something worth fighting for. A daughter who needed them both, and a love that had survived 3 years of separation, fear and pain. In the nursery, Sophia slept peacefully, unaware of the complicated history that had brought her parents back together. She would grow up knowing both of them, loved by both of them, protected by both of them. The tragedy that had nearly destroyed their family had instead become the catalyst for its rebirth. As December snow began to fall softly over Rome, a rare and beautiful sight, Matteo looked down at Elena and made a silent promise. Whatever the future held, whatever challenges came their way, he would be there. Not as the distant, work-obsessed man he had been 3 years ago, but as the father and partner his family deserved. "Thank you," Elena whispered. "For what?" "For not giving up, for finding us, for giving us another chance. Thank you for being strong enough to survive, for raising our daughter when I wasn't there, for being the incredible woman you've always been." From the nursery came a small sound, Sophia stirring in her sleep. Without thinking, both Matteo and Elena stood and moved toward their daughter's room, drawn by that instinct that all parents know, the need to check, to protect, to simply watch their child breathe. Sophia was fine, of course, just shifting positions, her small face peaceful in the soft glow of the nightlight. Matteo and Elena stood side by side at her crib, their hands finding each other in the darkness. "She's perfect," Elena breathed, "just like her mother." They stayed there for several minutes, watching their daughter sleep, connected by the small hand they had created together. And in that moment, despite everything they had been through, despite all the pain and fear and lost time, everything felt exactly as it should be. They were a family, and finally, they were home.